Hey y'all, I'm Cal. Let's get messy. Good morning, everyone. So, today I wanted to share something with you that has become really transformative for me um, in my life from start to finish. And that is the process of identifying your personal core values. So, I'm starting a business, right? I'm recently diagnosed autistic. We are moving back home. There's all these big changes going on in my life. And when things like that happen, you start to organically view things from different perspectives. So I'm starting this business. And when you're doing that, one of the first things you want to do is define your core values. You need to think, okay, what does my business stand for? What are the guiding principles that will direct my business? And when I sat down to do this, I was like, wait, I'm my business. I'm, like I said, I'm late diagnosed, flipping my life upside down, starting over at 50. And I'm not over here asking the question that most of us are asking, what's the meaning of life? I'm asking, who am I? How can I define my business core values without defining my personal core values first? And it was like a duh moment, like, why don't we teach this to our kids from this high? Or why isn't it taught in school? And, much more learned people than me have discussed this concept. Brene Brown, whose values list I use and will be linked with the document that's going to be attached to download. But I don't think most of us, until we're in this situation, would ever even think to do this. And while it's really powerful for everyone, I think it holds significance for those in the autistic community, particularly those who receive their diagnosis later in life. And so I kind of wanted to walk through my process with you today because it's really helped me hone in on not only once I translated this into my business's values, what I want the rest of my life to stand for, right? Because the first 50 years have been chaos, if I'm just being completely honest. I knew what I believed and wanted to do, but I was so caught up in just trying to keep up with everybody else in my age group, I guess, and what society expected that even though I believed a lot of these things and they were a core value, I wasn't living them. And so maybe you will take this and just hone in on what you already know and use this to make better decisions in your life based on how you're already living, but doing it more intentionally. Or, maybe you are looking to make a change and want to redirect your life to a higher purpose or better purpose. Walking through this will kind of guide you through that. And by the end, you will have a tangible statement telling you how you're going to live your life. It's going to, once you really dig in and remember it and start living it intentionally based on this written, living, breathing document, it will become second nature. You won't even have to think about it in guiding your decisions with all these external pressures that we all face, regardless of where we're at in life and whether we're on the spectrum or not. So I wanted to walk through this process with you because I think it's really important for all of us. And, I encourage you to invest a little bit of time in yourself, not only for yourself, but for all of humanity. And then, I was thinking of some ideas of how else to use this. Maybe to improve your marriage. Maybe do your you and your spouse do your core values independently and then come together and write a marketing statement for your marriage. How you're going to interact with each other and make decisions in your marriage or for your children. Maybe sit down with your children if they're old enough for this and help them define theirs. Start them out early. So, yeah, I just thought it was really important. It was really powerful to me, for me, and I wanted to share it with y'all. So, the first part of this is the most difficult, and you'll see once I explain it once I walk you through it, once we get to steps 5, 6, and 7, 8, it's about 8 steps, those are going to go really quick. The meat of it is right here at the beginning, and it's understanding what values mean to you. I mentioned I'll link Brene Brown's list below. There are other resources available that have pre-written lists. Write your own. You better than anyone, unless you're in my position. Write your own. And the first part that you're going to see, though, if you use a pre-populated list, is you're going to have a tendency to start checking off really impressive words, right? And it's going to sound great and it's going to look great, and you're going to get to the end of the list and you're going to be like, oh, I checked off every single word. Well, just because they sound good don't mean they fit in your life at this particular moment. It requires a lot of honesty with yourself and reflection. So, for example, two of the first ones I checked off were financial stability and job security. Well, sounds great. But clearly, based on the decisions I've made, those are not driving factors in my decisions or where I want my life to go. Yes, they would make it easier to live out some of my other more purposeful core values, but they're not what gets me out of bed in the morning, right? So when you're going through this, ask yourself these questions. What experiences in my life reflect this value, or what experiences do I want to have that will reflect this value? How do you feel when this value is honored or violated? And is it truly your value, or is it something that you've been taught by whoever that it's something that you should value? So again, this is not about an impressive list of values. It's the values that are genuine to you. And once we get into this, don't get caught up in having balanced buckets, because that's what we're going to do. We're going to take these core value words and we're going to place them into buckets. And it's no big deal if your buckets are heavily unbalanced, because you'll find that one value in one bucket is going to flow to a value in another bucket, and then another, and then back to a separate value in this bucket. So you might already have your buckets that you want to work through. I started out with the words first, and then as I had all of the words picked out that I knew was what I wanted to use to define how I'm living my life, I started going through them, and they just sort of naturally formed buckets. So mine ended up being personal integrity and healing, creative expression and growth, education, community, and advocacy. And when I look at my past and how I've thought I wanted to live my life, not necessarily that I was, these things made sense to me. And again, you might already have these defined buckets. You might have 3 buckets. You might have 7 buckets. I ended up with 5. So I really encourage you not to rush this reflection stage. It's hugely important, and you deserve to invest a little bit of time in yourself, right? So once you have these in buckets, these values in your buckets, you're going to start looking for patterns and connections between them. So, for example, my education bucket has curiosity, knowledge, and learning, and wisdom. Well, what happens in life? You're curious about something, so naturally you're going to try to learn about something. What happens when you learn something? You gain knowledge. What happens when you apply that knowledge? You gain wisdom. See how they all flow into each other within the bucket. So then, after we've seen how the values in one bucket connect to each other, you'll start to see how living one value from one bucket reinforces values from other buckets. For example, in my personal integrity and healing bucket, I have humility. Well, what in my other buckets does humility lead to? Learning, right? Because that means you're open to others' ideas if you're humble. Well, that's in my education bucket. Well, what does learning lead to? Back to my personal bucket, creativity. What does creativity lead to? Confidence, also in my personal bucket. So take the time to draw lines between these related values and then identify foundations versus outcomes. Once you've done all that, we're going to move on to step 3. And this is like the personal connection. Think about how you've lived these values or how you want to start living these values. A huge one for me is courage, which is under my personal integrity and healing. And when I started looking at that one, I was looking for, big ticket items. And if I'm being honest, there's not a whole lot of big ticket items for courage under in my life. So then I started thinking, okay, what else exemplifies courage to me? So then I started thinking about opening up to my children, being vulnerable with them about my mistakes and, letting them know that number one, I acknowledge that I wronged you in this way that I recognize. Number two, how can I help you now to overcome any problems that caused? Number three, what am I missing? What am I already not recognizing that I did wrong or hurt you or, made your life more difficult? And you don't see a lot of parents doing that, even in our day and age. Still, we're not seeing that like we should. And the sad part to me is, just because our children are grown and out of the house doesn't mean we're not their parent anymore, right? That's a till death do us part kind of thing. And so we have to keep working on that. We're constantly teaching our children even after they're grown, right? And so I don't want that relationship to stop where I left it when I made all of the mistakes I know that I made and just, brush them under the rug and pretend they didn't happen. No, no. I don't want to leave the same legacy that a lot of our parents have left us with. We're the ones who can change that. We're the ones who can stop these cycles. And for me, this has really been eye-opening to the importance of that and also has helped me clarify the direction that I want to take with healing my relationship with my children and being the mother to them now that I should have been for the past 20 something years. And now here's where things are kind of going to start picking up pace. Now we want to make a logical flow. We want to transform this collection into a coherent narrative, right? We want to identify foundational values, how they manifest in action, and what is the ultimate impact and purpose. Think of them as building a bridge, and these are your pillars, right? And the bridge spans across all of these to take you to your final destination, where you're trying to go with this exercise and with your life. Experiment with these sequences until it feels right. This step transforms your collection of values into a coherent narrative that's really, once you sit down and look at it, it's going to resonate. You know, start by identifying your foundational values, those that serve as the bedrock for everything else. For me, it was integrity and accountability from my personal bucket. Next, identify how these manifest in action. For me, it includes courage and self-discipline. And then finally, you want to articulate the impact of your purpose, right? Like what ultimate difference these values will make in my life when lived consistently. And in my case, going back to my children, this includes creating a meaningful legacy for them, stopping the cycles that have been going on for generations and generations. So again, building a bridge, you need strong pillars, your foundation values, a well-engineered span, your actions and manifestations of these, and then a clear destination. Where is the impact? When you think through this and put a lot of thought into it, your statement flows naturally from why you hold these values to how you express them in your daily life and what difference they make. And now that we've done all of the hard work, we're going to move on to step 5, and this is the easy stuff. I statements, present tense, action verbs, demonstrating an ongoing commitment. And then in step 6, you're going to want to show the flow of internal values to external impact. It'll show how you create positive ripples. For example, honest communication flows into trust, which flows into safer spaces. That's an example, with my children and what I discussed a few moments ago. Step 7, you're going to want to keep it genuine. You're writing this for yourself. This is not an assignment that you have to turn in. This is not an external marketing statement that you're sharing with the world in written form. Now, you will be sharing it with the world in how you live your life, but don't write it to impress others. Write it to define how you want to live so that you have a solid foundation and guidelines for making every decision. And then I want you to refine it, 2 or 3 sentences for each bucket. Capture the essence of what your values are without unnecessary words in between. So I'll share mine with you now, and you'll see that you'll hear these core value words, and how they'll flow from one to another between each of my buckets. I navigate life with unwavering integrity, embracing accountability while cultivating the courage to express my unique voice through creative vulnerability. My insatiable curiosity drives me to pursue knowledge and wisdom, transforming learning into practical solutions through collaboration and resourcefulness. I dedicate myself to fostering meaningful community connections through compassion and generosity, while advocating for justice, respect, and dignity for all people. Every decision I make is guided by ethical principles and self-discipline, balancing personal growth with service to others as I work toward creating spaces where true belonging can flourish and leaving a legacy that honors both our shared community and the generations to come. Now, that might sound businessy, and I did translate this into a lot of my core business values, but obviously pulling back on the personal. But because I do own my own business now, I have to incorporate that into my personal core values, right? And a lot of these, while they might sound businessy, like building a community, well, for somebody like me who doesn't really have a community at all, I've got a handful of family and a couple of Facebook friends, and that's about it. So in my personal life, that's very important, connecting with people who understand me and don't think I'm weird and understand how overwhelming friendships can be and will give me, the space to step back when I need to step back without judging me or, demeaning me like has happened in the past. So that's a really important part of my life. This is a living and breathing document, This is going to guide every decision I make. And I'm not to the point yet where I remember this, right off the top of my head. There have been a couple of decisions I've had to make where I'm like, I really need to read this and see what decision fits best with where I want my life to go, with how I want to be viewed externally, with how I want to view myself. And I've had to ask myself, does this decision align with who I've committed to being? Because I've committed to it now, and unfortunately, a lot of people that hear that statement might be like, what? That's not her. A lot of them have been core value principles that I haven't necessarily lived in all cases. And if I want to make a change in my life, if I want to go in a new direction and finally learn who I am, I have to start living my values instead of all of these ones that have been told to me that should be important that I've been trying to live, and it's gotten me nowhere but hurt and lost and confused. So I invite you to join me in this transformative process. It's not easy. It is going to take some time, but we all deserve to step back from, the pressures of our daily life, the social media, the all of this external stuff, and spend some time with ourselves, figure out, okay, why am I making decisions based on all of these external pressures and not decisions based on what I value? And it's just going to take small daily actions towards becoming who you are or who you want to be. So when you start this, ask yourself these things, what themes might form natural buckets? How might understanding these evolve with my life experiences? I can say with all certainty that several of these would not, had I done this 15 years ago, several of these would not have been on the list. I probably would have still had financial security and job security or on the list. And that wasn't working for me. Again, there's nothing wrong with having that be your core value, but I was trying to make it my driving force and it wasn't. It wasn't working for me. Where are the powerful connections between these values? And ask yourself this: if I did sit down and spend the time to define these, to write this out, to put it on a sticky note on my forehead, how would this change my daily decisions? How could I transform my life, or not even transform it, make it better? So I thank you for spending time with me today. I hope you have found this helpful in some way, maybe sparked a little bit of curiosity in you to at least look into it. I've got a document linked below. Again, like the last one, it's just a Google Doc. You don't have to put in your email address. But it's got all of these steps broken down and a link to Brene Brown's value list. Again, there's many others out there. I think I listed some books. Simon Sinek book, a Brene Brown book that I found interesting and helpful. So yeah, I don't have anything else to say. I love you. Bye. And I hope to see you in the next episode. Bye.